Hi guys, this is Vidas and welcome to Secrets of Organ Playing podcast. Usually these episodes are filmed together with Ausra, where we discuss questions concerning various aspects of organ playing is submitted by organists from around the world. But today is a very special episode where I will be interviewing alone a very interesting guest. So hopefully you will enjoy this episode enormously. I'll leave you the mystery a little bit who this guest is, but I am sure you will enjoy this episode tremendously. Welcome to Secrets of Organ Playing. I'm your host Vidas, and today I'm delighted to speak with a very special guest, someone whose music has brought inspiration, beauty and calm to listeners and performers around the world. Dr. James Michael Stevens, joining us from Nashville, Tennessee, is a remarkably prolific composer, pianist and educator. He currently serves as the Dean of the School of Music at Welch College, and his creative output is nothing short of astonishing. With thousands of published compositions, Dr. Stevens has developed a signature style that blends lyrical grace, spiritual depth, and heartfelt simplicity. Many of his works, especially his meditative piano pieces, have become favorites amongst church musicians, educators, and recording artists alike. His music resonates deeply with people looking for comfort, peace, and emotional honesty. And more recently, it has also found a home in the repertoires of organists. In this episode, we'll explore how James approaches composition and stays so remarkably productive. We'll discuss how he balances creative flow with discipline, what inspires the emotional tone of his music, and how sacred themes guide his writing. We'll also talk about his experiences in music education, the challenges and rewards of publishing, and what advice he could give to aspiring composers and church musicians today. So, James, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's truly an honor to speak with you.
Thank you, Vidas. So honored to be with you. I'm just thrilled to have a chance to meet you finally and talk to you.
Right. I've been following your work online for a number of years, probably since the pandemic. I
Yeah.
think one of our common organist friends on YouTube, maybe James, maybe Reen, brought your works to my attention, and it's been really a delight following your such a prolific output and playing some of the pieces myself. So I'm really curious what that you publish so many thousands of works, and how do you maintain such a consistent creative output throughout the years?
Well, the biggest thing is I just keep doing it. I'm just highly motivated to write a lot of pieces, and I just want to not stop. I mean, it's you can make a choice on if you want to. You can write one a month, but if you can write one a month, you can write two. If you can write two, you can write four. If you can write four, and so on. And I try to finish something most every day. But sometimes it might be a little less than that. But I just try to keep productive and just keep focused and keep moving.
Amazing. I know what it is to create every day myself, with every organ videos, and I also compose organ music from time to time, but and blog posts from my Secrets of Organ blog, and it's really, really strenuous job. If you do it, for a week or a month, it's okay, like a challenge, but do it year after year and decade after decade, it's amazing to notice this. And how many years have you been composing so far, James?
Well, I think I started when I was a teenager, but my first published piece is was with Shawnee Press in 1981. So this was quite a while, and this is back before they had where you do any self-publishing and everything. It was more of a harder thing to break into. An interesting story on that is that it was like my third or fourth piece I'd sent in. And after that, I just thought everything I wrote was going to be gold. And it actually took another 8 years before I had my second published piece. So I think one thing as a composer you have to do is just not give up.
Not give
Be
up. Yeah.
persistent and realize some things are going to take a long time, to develop and everything.
Yeah, those rejections, I know what it means also, and it's discouraging a lot of times, right? But if you keep
Mhm.
persisting and doing one time again and again and again, never giving up, it might lead to some success, right? Eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you never know when you're writing sometimes, you don't always have a good, clear picture of if it's good or not. Sometimes you can write something and you think, boy, this is great. And then you look back at it and you think, oh, this was really trash, But also sometimes you'll write something and you'll look back at it and you say, I had something there, So it's not always easy to evaluate, but you just have to keep going and keep coming back to it and rethinking it and all.
Yes, I heartily agree, of course. And so, what is your typical composing day or routine like? For example, I know it's morning in Nashville right now, but I don't know
Yeah.
if have you composed yet today, or do you compose in the evenings or in the afternoons, mornings? How does it look for you?
Well, today I did some promotion things. So
Hmm.
where I was trying to, there's all these little things you've got to sort of keep up with and everything. But a lot of times I will compose at night, sometimes early evening, middle night, and sometimes we'll finish something completely in one sort of sitting where I do the recording and do the engraving and upload it and everything. Sometimes I will sort of leave some of it undone and finish the editing of the manuscript the next morning. So it varies. And of course, when I'm in school, I really can't publish during the day. So most of it's at night when I get home or early in the morning.
Mm. Yeah, every one of us is different, right? Some of us
Yeah.
really work only at night, right? In middle of the night at the recording
Right.
or compositions, and some of us really wake up very early and start creating right away at 6 or 5 a.m., right?
Yeah.
It's probably up to us, up to everyone to discover the best of routines that we could adapt to ourselves, right?
Well, when I was young, I liked writing way into the night, like after midnight and just very late because everything was quiet and all. But now I pretty much shut down by 10 or 11 o'clock and all. But it varies. You just sometimes you just got to do it when you can and when you've got time. But then when you look at it, everybody's got the same amount of time. So sometimes you've just got to, make time and just keep finding a place to work on stuff, even if it's just a little bit here and there.
Beautiful. And so imagine you have an idea of a spiritual or meditative character piece to write, right? So, where do you start? How do you approach the writing of such a piece?
Hmm. Well, sometimes I come up with an idea first. Maybe it's a something I want to convey. Maybe it's a verse or some kind of spiritual idea. Sometimes actually I do things in reverse. I sort of do things and there's two like traditions and the classical music with the traditional where you have music for music's sake and where you write things based on a program and an idea. Sometimes I will finish a whole song without any idea, and then after the fact, will sort of think, well, what does it feel like? What does it feel like I'm trying to say, and then try to name it, later. So it just depends. That sort of seems like that's not a romantic way to do it, but sometimes I just write and then try to get an idea and a melody and a feel for something, and then later we'll give it a name. But sometimes I start with a name or an idea right at the very beginning. So
Mhm.
it just varies.
Very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, for some of us, we come up with a name at first and then we try to create a melody and a tune or a harmony based on that name and an idea, right? And others just start to improvising or writing on the paper or on the software, and then only then come up with the name, right? Everyone is different.
Well, I think you mentioned improvising. I know you're very good at doing that and teaching it too. And I love improvising. And I had a professor one time that said that really composition is just selected improvisation. And in a sense, I think that's true. And when you learn to improvise, you play around, you try to come up with an idea, and then sometimes it's like, well, I like that, and then you keep that idea, and sometimes, well, that didn't work at all. But sometimes in the process, I think of improvisation, you sort of are able to work through and sort of wander magically upon, an idea sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. It's nice to sit down at the instrument, right? Sometimes and just to
Mhm.
try out some things and before even committing something to paper on or notation software. And by the way, do you compose primarily at the piano, keyboard, or do you work well with the notational software directly?
Yeah. Well, so that's an interesting question. I do everything at a large piano keyboard,
Hmm.
weighted keyboard, and I use really nice, software that I use on the, computer. But I do it a little different from some people, and you may do it this way too. I I write everything down first, and then as soon as I finished writing in all the notes, I record it and everything. Now, a lot of artists, especially those who are more ear sort of oriented, will play, and I love to just improvise and just play, and that would be fun just to record. But after the fact, it's so much harder to go back and transcribe your own work,
Of
and
course, I understand there are software for transcription, automatic transcriptions nowadays, and even with AI help,
yeah,
they provide reasonably clean transcriptions. And on Finale or Sibelius or other, you can actually clean it up automatically, right?
yeah,
Or manually later, after the fact, taking MIDI or music XML file, but. But it's definitely different if you
yeah.
write fixed melody right away, right? And
Mhm.
only then perform it as a finished composition, as opposed to improvising something straight away at the
Yeah.
keyboard. Yeah.
Yeah, so I put it like straight. I use Finale, and of
Mhm.
course, we all know of the problems with Finale recently with the
Yes.
shutting down. So there's a lot of decisions I've got to figure out. I've got Dorico too, but I haven't done so well yet. But uh, but yeah, I put everything first in Finale. There are
Hmm.
only exceptions I've really had on that is when I've done a few like jazz things when I was sort of just trying to capture, the improvisation and stuff. But in retrospect, I wish I'd written all those down, to start with. It's just so much e easier. And sometimes I think you can sort of think it out more carefully when you're writing it on the paper. And when you improvise, and you may not notice a glaring fault in your harmony or your interactions of the voices and stuff. And when it's written down, you can see that a little better. Of course,
Hmm.
you don't want to become too mechanical, in that regard and not free. But I think it helps to analyze it carefully as you're doing it.
Very interesting. Sometimes what works for me if I sit down on the at the keyboard or at the organ bench, let's say, I I try to, let's say, improvise, but with the composition in mind right away. So I
Yeah.
would not be playing something very advanced, very free rhythmically, right? I would think about meter and keys and texture right away. How would it look on paper or on the
Yeah.
screen, right? As I am playing. So it takes some discipline to do this because all of us are free and want to play almost without any
Yeah.
restrictions, right? It's more difficult this way, definitely.
Well, I think the key sometimes is when you have freedom where you could play anything. You could play any kind of chord, any kind of thing, is to recognize the kind of piece you're trying to do and find just the right chords or just the right type of melody that fits that setting, because it's real important to everything to be cohesive. You can't throw everything into every piece, So you have to just select the parts, things that you're really strong at, or that the things that fit that particular piece, and work on that as well. So
I definitely agree. Yeah, very interesting. And uh, we talked about improvisation, right? Where did you start? Where did you start improvising? As a student, or even earlier? How did
well,
you become interested in improvisation? Can you tell us?
Well, I'll give you my sort of background on piano a little bit,
Right.
and this is sort of a little funny here. I actually, when I was in the fifth grade, we moved to a new town. My mom signed me out for piano lessons, and I hated it. She got me out of PE one day a week to go down the street and take piano lessons, and that's not what a macho young man wanted to do, So the teacher actually kicked me out of lessons, and and uh, uh, and then I was sort of thrilled, but my mommy was about ready to kill me. But after that, I started remembering the lines and the spaces, and I went on my own and started just sort of figuring out the notes on the page. And eventually, I went through a lot of different piano teachers, and I went back to her. She was a great teacher, but I but on the when I started working on the improvisation, I couldn't improvise. If it wasn't written on the page, I couldn't play it. So when I would get around people that improvised, I was always amazed. It was always like they knew some dark art, and somehow they got in a mystical fit when they were playing, and all these notes popped out. So I was always asking them what they were doing, and in the process, I started really learning music theory and sort of started breaking it down. Well, what is going on in improvisation? What is happening? And I taught myself to improvise using theory.
Mhm.
And that's sort of a backward approach because most people, as I'm sure you know, who improvise, it's just natural to them, and they don't really think about what they're doing. They just do it, and therefore it's very difficult for them to explain or to teach someone else because it's never been a difficult thing. So I think in some ways by coming from the other side, it allows you to sort of unlock it and then sort of teach others and to use it. So to me, the music theory is just it can't be more important. Just understanding all aspects of it and even different styles and different periods and what makes different pieces a different piece and everything. So yeah.
That's so helpful and interesting for musicians to understand, because if they're just playing from the heart, from the ears, not only they cannot explain to others, right, what they're doing, it's so much harder for them to notate it, right, what they're
Yeah.
doing,
Oh yes, of course.
to transcribe, so to say,
Yeah.
right? If you are thinking more intellectually, then you could approach explaining, teaching, and of course transcribing those
And I
ideas.
think what happens too is that people, whatever kind of musician you are, you get real comfortable with whatever your strengths are. So if you're a great reader and notes on the page, then sometimes you shy away from things by ear and improvisation, and a lot of times teachers do as well because they don't understand it. And then sometimes the ones who are play by ear, trying to get them to learn to read things is a big chore because why would they want to start at the beginning when they can already sit down and just play all this great stuff. So I think as musicians to be well-rounded, we have to encourage ourselves to not just focus on our strengths, but figure out, well, what are our weakness sides too, and sort of work to and improve those so you grow as a well-rounded musician. And then when you work with musicians, you're always going to have a mixed bag of people. So you need to be able to communicate with each set. The ones who are more classically trained readers and the ones who are more ear, chord chart, improvisers and stuff. So it's very important to be well-rounded, I think.
I heartily agree, of course. And your music often has a very lyrical and peaceful quality, right? Like meditations, beautiful contemplations. Um, what composers or musical traditions have most influenced your style?
Well, my favorite composers are I like Rachmaninoff, and I love
Aha,
his very lyrical, pieces, and like his Adagio from the Second Symphony, his of course his second and third concertos, his Paganini. Is I love his lyricism and that you hear in his music. I like the French composers like from these particularly like the Impressionist Ravel and Debussy, and those are I think some of my favorites. And I like jazz. I
hmm,
grew up sort of, enjoying that, playing in some big band music and even playing a group. We used to play a group called Spiral Gyra. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but it's sort of a Latin jazz, type thing.
right.
So it's just a variety, of things.
Well-rounded musician, right?
Yeah.
Definitely. And is talking about your style and influence later. How do you choose the character of the pieces? For example, I know that you sometimes create not only meditations but also bold pieces, right? Playful pieces, various genres basically, which would work performed in a row like a suite, right? So uh, can you tell us a little bit about that? How do you come up with the character of the piece in your compositional process?
Well, in some ways, I try to just mix it up. I like to do these very lyrical things with smooth moving, chords and have I lost you? I think I may lost you for a second there. So, well, anyway, I sometimes I like to do these big, bold toccata type things, even though I'm no expert in that. But I love to. I try to imagine myself in a cathedral,
Mhm.
and I try to imagine myself as someone like you, or James or Ryan, and imagine, well, if I did have those great skills, what would I do? So one of my favorite books I is a book by C.S. Lewis called Mere Christianity, and
Right.
he has this famous chapter, and it's famous to me because I love it. It's called "Let's Pretend," and basically the idea is sometimes if you're not all these great things that you want to be, or if you're not a certain great composer, imagine what would you do, how would you write if you were that person, you know. So sometimes I try to, pretend I have maybe skills I don't have, and then sort of, reach into that and imagine and it's always, hard, but I like sometimes I like doing modern pieces. Like
Mhm.
you played the other day that Centipede
Yes.
that I did and just as a change of pace, I enjoy trying some other styles and all.
Yeah, I've noticed the change of characters over the years in your compositions. They have become very varied and actually quite unpredictable sometimes. And you explore atonal music, right? Avant-garde styles a little
Yeah.
bit, and as you say, some lyrical, of course, some bold, and together they make your music more appealing to a wide range of musicians, not only those who like meditations, let's say, and spiritual contemplations, right? Relaxing piano music, but also, let's say, organists who are concert organists and looking for a new repertoire to play, right? It's
Yeah.
it's very interesting to see the development of your style too.
Well, some people like that sort of thing, um, and really appreciate it. Some don't. I had like a piano well-known pianist listen to some of my music. I was asking his advice one time, and he listened to a bunch of my stuff, and then he listened to some of these horror piano pieces I did that were really somewhat atonal, you know. And then he came back and he just said flat out, he says fans hate that sort of thing, you know, but yet I don't want to get sort of stuck into everything of one style. I think there's something sometimes there's just a palate cleanser in a sense of doing something, you know, completely different. And
Yeah.
sometimes these modern, like I've written some 12 tone pieces,
Hmm.
you know, at times. I wouldn't recommend doing that for a Sunday morning, you know, meditation, those kind of things. But sometimes writing those kind of things are almost like a palate cleanser. You know, you sort of a refresher, and once you get rid of them, then you can go back and you might have a new look at some of the lyrical things or the bolder things. It sort of breaks you away because it's easy to get monotonous with what you're doing and all.
It's like drinking a sip of tea between wine tastings, right? Or
Yeah.
cheese tastings. Yeah,
Yes.
various kinds of cheese, let's say, and it gives you a fresh perspective of a new of an and the next taste. Yeah,
Yes.
definitely. Yeah, very interesting, very interesting. So, of course, we all know that since the pandemic, you started creating more for the organ as well, right?
Yeah.
So, what challenges or even freedoms do you find in organ composition?
Well, I love the organ. I actually do play organ. I'm not on I'll never be on you guys' level, you know. I mean, the guys I work with, like you and Carson and James Ryan, are just unbelievable. Um, but I took organ when I was young from Randy Bolden, who now plays at a cathedral in Mobile, Alabama, um, and we used to go to some pipe organs. He played in the Episcopal church and a Catholic church he was my piano teacher every morning. And we would go well, we would go take lessons there. So I learned, you know, from that. But I never really wrote for organ hardly because I was intimidated by the registrations, even though I understood the registrations and the meanings of everything on the organs I played. You know, there's such a vast difference in organs. So I think around 2007 or 17 or 18, somewhere around there, a guy in Ohio actually commissioned me to write a set of organ pieces. And I thought, oh no, what am I going to do? But I didn't turn it down. I just decided I would do that. And then and then after I did a set of four, and I actually put the registrations down there. And then after that, Carson had heard it and contacted me and asked if it would be okay if he played a couple of them, you know. And I said, great, you know. But um, but when I did that, I was still nervous about writing more because of the writing down what to put on the registrations. But what freed me in a sense was I watched Carson in an interview that he did with a professor, organ professor at Syracuse, and he talked about organ writing, and he sort of suggested that you didn't need to put all these elaborate, you know, registrations because that sort of opened it up to more freedom to the player. So when he said that, that sort of unlocked, you know, that it was okay for me just to write organ and to give more general ideas and let each performer just decide what they want to do it or how they want to make it for their own organ. Because even the same stops on every organ is different. You know, some stops will be great on one organ, will be completely different on another.
Well, I agree with you here, and it's fun to observe some colleagues of mine who are composing for the organ, and some are very specific what kind of stops they want, and they write it down
Yeah.
next to the indications. But others just, for example, write. Tempo, character, maybe dynamics, right? And
Yeah.
maybe that would be almost enough for them, right? And leave the rest of them to the performer to decide.
Well, like on the if there's something really specific I want, you know, I'll put that in there. Like on that one you played the other day, the Prelude Supreme, it
Yes.
had this trumpet sort of stop. So I just put in there, you know, at those places like a solo trumpet
Hmm.
mixture, you know,
And
just
that
a
was very helpful, by
yeah,
the way. I could know that, oh, that section and the next section
yeah,
towards the end needed to be played as a solo. And the other ways, the other sections had to be played more in a chordal style, right? So
yeah.
that was very helpful too.
But I
Yeah.
love the organ. I'm going to try to keep, writing for it. It's just something grand and glorious about hearing it. Now, to be honest, I've been in very few cathedrals, and but I always imagine myself being at one and being in there and hearing it, playing one and everything. So, but I wish I was had a stronger background on actually hearing those things live.
Hmm. I think you would be amazed and actually probably inspired even if you heard your music performed live in a concert setting in a very reverberant church or a big
Oh yeah.
cathedral. Um, and even if you would come up to the organ loft and see what happens when the player organist plays it, right? So it's so inspiring to hear your music performed live by others, not
Sure.
by yourself, but others. I know that feeling, yeah.
Yeah, I
So.
would love to be able to do that and one
Mm.
day.
One day, definitely, yeah. All of us, who are programming our music for recitals are thinking of new and refreshing pieces to choose from living composers, not only from the classics
Yeah.
of the past periods. But so it's been so good knowing you and knowing your work and following your work that yeah, those opportunities for you expanding your network are constantly increasing, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. So, for organists, let's say, who are looking to incorporate your music into church services or concerts, do you have any advice how to choose wisely among your vast output?
Well, I would perhaps go to like I put everything on Sheet Music Plus.
Mhm.
Sometimes you can go up on there and listen to like full recordings and full video things from YouTube of all of them, and maybe use some of the search to find some of them. Um, to be honest, on some of my pieces, you may run into this too, but so many of them I forget them. You know, when I'm writing a whole lot, when I after I write them, I have a hard time remembering, the actual, pieces. I sort of do, and there's some of them I do, but and in some way that's sort of a compositional technique, is you don't want to always be thinking about the ones that you've already written and spending
Yes,
time
about the past.
looking at it. Because if you do that, then you're never going to keep moving at other things. You can stare at your old stuff. I know guys that have written just a few pieces, and all they do is look at those few pieces and are always whittling, on it, when you're better off just letting it go, and moving ahead and doing, something else. So I guess I was in a roundabout, saying, on some of my things, if I could think of the pieces to play, it's hard for me to actually remember the actual melodies and stuff unless I actually went back and found them again.
Mhm.
And then sometimes I'm surprised, So
Beautiful. Your music is, of course, so spiritual at times, and so, do you feel that your faith influence your music as well as a work of your compositions as well? Your faith and music connection. Can you share a little bit about that?
yes, well, I'm a Christian, and
Mhm.
I believe strongly that every good gift, comes from God, and every idea that you have in some way, that's where it originates, from. And so I'm always, you know, well, most of the time I pray, before I, write something, ask
Mm.
for, guidance, to help me find, something that will be meaningful, and that will, touch someone in some spiritual way and everything. So I think it's a very important, thing. And I'm very thankful to God for giving me the talent.
Mhm.
And I try to, I mean, everything that I write wouldn't be something that would fit into a service, but I think that a lot of them, would. And I want them to be things that would be meaningful and appropriate for sacred services of many different types of denominations and groups and everything.
Definitely. And of course, um, a lot of composers approach their composition as a form of prayer too.
Mhm.
So, do you see your compositions as a form of ministry, for example?
Yes, of course. I wanted to, some of them I've done in those like sets that are just specifically designed, for ministry. Like
Mhm.
I did some Preludes of Peace.
Yes.
That was I think I did some prelude songs were like out, prayers that are musical about prayers. I can't even think of the names of some of them, but a lot of them were specific. I did a lot of sacred prelude series. My first series that I did, that the very first set I did was sacred preludes for organ, 1 through 4, and then I did several more of those. So a lot of them are specifically for services, some for Lent, some for wedding settings, a lot hopefully for preludes and postludes, and depending on the styles and stuff.
How about talking a little bit about your teaching and mentorship? Remember, of course, you are a dean of School of Music at Welch College. So, what do you see as the most important qualities to instill in young musicians today?
Hmm. Well, I'd say a love of music, and a love of the classics. I think the and to be well-rounded musicians. And for church musicians particularly, there's such a trend to, we talked about improvising and stuff, to be just chord chart performers and worship team, type, players. I just really think uh, any musician in the church or the school or whatever needs to just be well-rounded. They need to have skills in not just one area, but skills that they can use in just many different, settings and everything.
Mhm.
So, let me give you information. My background is education, leading up to that. So I went to Samford University and a bachelor's degree in Birmingham, Alabama, Homewood, outside of Birmingham. I got a master's in at Southern Seminary in Louisville. And now you went to was it Kansas City, Missouri, or is it
That was University of Nebraska, Lincoln.
Nebraska? Okay, I knew it was in
Mhm.
the Midwest and everything.
Mhm.
So, and then I got my doctorate in composition from University of Kentucky.
Mhm.
I taught a year at Southern Seminary, teaching theory and some arranging, composition, stuff, and then I've been at my college now since 2004. So it's been a little over, I guess, 20 years, now. So it's been I can't imagine I've been there that long, makes me feel old. But but anyway, and at the college I teach sometimes music theory, but I teach oral theory. I teach choral arranging and music history, 1 and 2, which is medieval through 20th century. And then I direct a choir and teach sometimes choral conducting and sometimes music appreciation.
Right.
So I think in today's musician, even in schools and stuff, um, if you're training and want to teach any kind of school, you have to be a jack of all trades. It's rare, I think, anymore that universities want to hire somebody that only does one thing, you know. So you have to be, if you're going to do, voice, you've also got to do theory or, something else. So,
Definitely, yeah, definitely. Today it's much harder to be a specific niche-oriented musician, right? Like,
yeah,
uh, like let's say an organist professor, right?
yeah,
In at college level, and a lot of times professor teaching organist, they teach other classes like music
yeah,
history, music theory, combining things, even music appreciations, as you say, too. So a lot of times. Students become not necessarily professional musicians, right? But lovers of music, fans of music in a broader sense, and end up in different professions doing other work throughout their lives.
Mhm.
But music is always close to them, right?
Yeah,
They make music after work, for example, as a hobby.
yeah.
Do you find that your former students, for example, do that as well?
Yeah, I think so. I particularly among church musicians,
Hmm.
I'm not sure how it is where you're at, but it's sort of somewhat becoming rare for full-time positions for musicians and church. So same thing in the church. If you're gonna, it may be you have to do a variety of things when you're, at a church. It may not be just, music. It may be either some other things of the church, or it may be that music's not your primary role, and that you have another job and you're doing it sort of as a avocation, as a secondary, position and everything. So I think that's true.
Mhm. And talking about your students, do you find that over the years they become more creative or less creative over the years as generation changes, right? And how do you encourage creativity in them?
Hmm. Well, we have some uh, students who have really done great, who are very, creative. Some great improvisers, and some who are really getting into to writer, or, writing and stuff like that. And so I always want to encourage that. I don't have a lot of opportunities to teach, composition, but when I do, I like last semester I had a couple composition teachers, students, and
Hmm.
I just love it when I'm able to do that. And it's kind of thing where I would love to spend lots of time working with somebody on composition and arranging and improvisation, because it's what I think about, a lot of the time. But sometimes the musicians don't want to. They want a narrow path. They want to just learn what they've got to learn for their jury, or to get by, whatever. So I guess trying to encourage them to want more.
And that's very interesting. Now, what I'm going to tell you, uh, are your students aware of your versatility and your life beyond college, that you're such a prolific and successful composer, for example, and recording artist, right? Streaming your music all over the streaming platforms today. Do they know about
I
this?
think they're somewhat aware, mostly, aware and everything, but I don't know if they're aware of how much I work at it, or, and do, but I think so.
That's nice
Yeah.
because if they don't, they approach their professors like everyone else, right? Every
Yeah.
other professor, but you are very unique, and I can almost guess that probably very few colleges and universities have such a prolific composers among their faculty members, right? And if your students know about it and they look at your output from this perspective, they might become even inspired.
Well, I hope so. When I think about, I think I've got between 8 and 10,000 publications out, now, or
Wow.
something. I'm not sure exactly, and all, but so when I think about that number, it seems like, well, that's just impossible, But I think on the what I encourage my students to do is just to be steady and slow and consistent and persistent. I often tell the students the story about the tortoise and the hare.
Yes.
About it's more important to like to go slow but never stop than it is to like be a flash in the pan and do things crazy for a while, and that's all you do. So, I think on everything, you just gotta, just even my composition, I just try to keep moving. Now, sometimes I set goals. I set specific goals. Like, this will sound sort of pompous when I say this, but one of my goals on Sheet Music Plus is I wanted to have more music listed there than Bach, and at the moment I do, you know, but it but it's funny because I'll turn my head and somebody's put up 20 more Bach transcriptions, and
Right.
so I'm behind again. So I have to you know, I just keep working at it, because it's a maybe a silly goal, but sometimes it helps to make some kind of goals in your mind. What do you want to achieve? How much would you like to do? Or, do you I mean, for some people to think about doing 10 pieces in a year is just overwhelming. But if you worked at, well, if I could do one a month, then I would have it,
Yes,
And
definitely.
then, then I think over time, people, you've probably maybe seen some what I said about the misconception about quality and quantity.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sometimes, people think that if the person who's putting out quantity is doing so without any quality. But really, if you're working on quality and you're being slow but steady over time, your quantity and your quickness, you get a lot quicker with what you do. So you just because you're doing things quicker at a later time doesn't mean that you're doing things with less quality. Because I know of people too, I mentioned somewhat before, where they sit around all day thinking about their three pieces, and their excuse for not writing 40 is that they care more about quality, you know.
Yes.
And so
Remember the story about Rossini and his string quartets that I think he lost a score of one quartet and he was in bed that day and he was too lazy to get up to pick up that sheet and he created another quartet
oh
because
really?
but it doesn't mean that because the speed of his writing, the easiness
Yeah.
of his writing, it doesn't mean that his music is less creative, less with less quality, right?
Yes.
It's just him. Yeah, the same thing.
Yeah.
Even if he creates slowly or fast, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. It's Rossini.
Well,
Yeah.
everybody's, different too. You
Mhm.
talk about like Beethoven, who was at the same time as Rossini, who was he was very meticulous and he would make changes and all he was very over crafting a melody. He would change it and work on it and fix it. And whereas someone like Mozart, was for him, the first time he wrote it down, that was it.
Exactly.
It was like perfect. So everybody I think's, different, but there's nothing to say that because someone writes something fast that you should assume that it's less than someone who spends a year working on a piece and all.
Definitely, yeah. People should not neglect the daily routine, daily ritual of writing, and
Yes.
that helps you develop actually faster writing techniques,
Yeah.
and it's just like typing faster, right? At first
Yeah,
you
right,
type
exactly.
with two fingers and
Yeah.
very very slowly, and then after a year of typing, you see, oh, I can use all my fingers for this, and it becomes so much faster. Right, but it's the same quality
Same,
typing. Yeah,
same thing.
yeah,
Same
same
thing when
thing.
yeah, I've taught myself to type, and I remember putting my fingers on all the keys, trying to learn the right way, and over time, all of a sudden, I never think about it anymore. I tell my students sometimes the stages of learning is when you're trying to like learn theory and oral theory and everything is that at first you don't know nothing, and then the second stage you know what you're supposed to know, but you're having to think about it, all the time. But there comes another stage where it be the things you've learned become automatic. But there's no way to get there without, this, careful, realizing what you need to know, work on it very carefully and methodically. But then there comes a point after hours and hours of doing something that it just happens. You just know it. You don't think about it anymore.
Mhm.
So, but if everything would get there fast like that, would be good, but not always.
That's the famous 10,000 rules,
Yes,
10,000 hour
yes,
rule, right? The
yes,
famous rule of developing a skill at some advanced craft, like
hmm
playing an instrument, building something, or making a sculpture, designing something. Science definitely
yeah.
is in this niche as well. Well, here we are, of course, in compositional realm as well. You certainly did your 10,000 hours.
Yes. Well, yeah, I agree with that completely. You just got to keep putting in the hours and everything. And it's almost impossible. I mean, you hear 10,000 hours and that sounds like, well, how can anybody ever do 10,000 hours? but if you do it an hour at a time, can I do one more hour? And
Yes.
you keep working on it, it just adds up, and so but the people who just sit around and think about, well, if I could do it, if I just tried, but then they don't try, just you just got to put one foot in front of the other and just keep working on stuff. And when you put in the hours like that, if you get to 10,000 on anything, hopefully you've mastered your craft. Or if you haven't, you should have been in another area.
Very good advice. So, talking about publishing advice, right? Because you have had so much success with self-publishing, what advice would you offer to composers trying to get their music out into the world?
Yeah. Well, when I first started, I was actually doing choral music.
Hmm.
And this was, years ago, and I wrote for a lot of different mainstream, publishers and everything. But when I started figuring out this online thing, with like Sheet Music Plus and Sheet Music Direct, and there's some other ones too. I realized that you can do it all yourself, And so to be successful in it, and if you want to sort of actually make something on it and everything, you have to learn to do all facets of the publishing process. You have to be you have to do your own engraving. And if you're paying for somebody to engrave your pieces, like if I improvise a piece and I send it to someone and ask them to engrave it, and there's guys that do that. They'll do
Yes.
an album and they pay somebody to engrave it. Well, if I did that for as many pieces I was doing, I'd be poor forever,
Yeah, exactly.
But you have to learn to engrave your own pieces. You have to learn to do your own artwork type things or page layout and learn how to record your own pieces. Now, we haven't mentioned recording as far as software or whatever, but right now I use mainly Finale on the engraving, but on the software I use Logic Pro X. And I think you use that too. Is that right? Or
I use, depending on the instrument. For example, for the piano, recently I started composing for piano. I use Piano Tech.
okay,
It has many great samples for real pianos, and I'm using
yeah,
just New York style Steinway at the
uh,
moment, and it produces, as you know, I can hit record and I can improvise, as
yes,
we talked about before,
yes,
and then later transcribe, or I can compose using, let's say, Sibelius or Finale or Dorico, and
yeah,
then play from the score
yeah.
on the piano tech, and it would produce very nice
Well, pretty,
recording, very
yeah.
realistic. Is that do you find your samples at Logic Pro X also
Well,
realistic?
I actually don't use the Logic Pro samples.
Hmm.
And when I record, I don't play it from the score. I look at the score on the screen
Uh-huh.
and I play it while I record it live, into the Logic, Pro. So I use different ones. The one I use mainly on my piano is uh, the Yamaha SFX Grand from Garrison.
Hmm.
I use that. I think it's just a beautifully, sampled piano. Sometimes I use the piano noir, and then there's some felted piano softwares I use. So I don't use any of the Logic on the pianos, and I used to use some of the Logic on the organs, but I don't really use those much anymore. I've
Hmm.
got some other sample sets that I use on the organs when I record.
Hmm.
But anyway, the Logic is just for me just does great. Now some guys, professionals that I know use they like the Pro Tools, which
Yes.
is another well-known one. But I would say while I'm thinking about it here, the I would encourage young composers or people who are getting into it to get the higher level programs to use. Like, don't get a cheap recording program. Get or the Finale. Get so you can't buy Finale now, but get one of the Sibelius or Dorico, one of the high-end Cadillac programs. Now they're harder to learn, but in the end, you can do anything on them. Some
Hmm.
of the cheaper programs may work well for getting going quickly, But then when you find yourself or want some nuance on how you want it on the page or different things, you sort of are sort of caught short, sometimes. But but anyway, so when I record them, then I jump them over as a AIF, file
Hmm.
and then I jump it to change it to a WAV file,
Yes.
and then also do a 320 MP3s on them, and I use those for the waves I use for when I do on streaming services when I upload. And then on the MP3s, I use for like Sheet Music Plus to put on, examples and stuff, and for other people who want to do promotions. A lot of times they like the MP3s because they're smaller files and everything.
Hmm.
But uh, but anyway, so you need to be able to work all these different programs and do it just learn them yourself. It may take time, but there's almost no way to do it a lot of it if you're not doing it all. And
Yeah.
that's the reason I don't do really choral anymore. Is even though I love doing choral music and I've written hundreds of choral pieces over the years, the trying to find a group of singers. Why would I pay singers or go the trouble of trying to find a set when I can just simply use all the instruments I have on the computer, and everything. And that may be a cheap way out or something. So
Hmm. I noticed there is now a few platforms now where you can actually transcribe your MIDI files from Finale or Sibelius with lyrics into quite realistically sounding vocal production, like choirs
yeah,
or even soloists, or even later combined with instrumental ensembles.
yeah,
Uh, it's possible. I've created one choir piece recently, and used as a demo version this program, and I was surprised that now I don't have to pay the choir to sing it. It's
yeah.
not, of course, as realistic as the real choir, but
Mhm.
for demo version, it's plenty. Yeah.
Yeah, I think some of those really are amazing.
Hmm.
And but you mentioned AI on the recording, stuff. Something to be mentioned here. I've worked with a guy who's all he does is like film and TV music. We work
Hmm.
on some stuff together, and he let me hear the other day some AI music, and you can literally right now you can on these AI programs for music you can sing like a melodic idea. You can put lyrics, in a thing. Pick a singer styles that you want. Pick the instrumentation and all this stuff and push a button
Push a button.
and
Hmm.
and in minutes or less, a highly crafted master that you would have a hard time telling that it was anything other than the real thing. I mean, unbelievable. So
Unbelievable.
that gives a lot of pause to composers when you see people doing this sort of thing. And my friend said he talked to some program directors at some of these film and TV companies, and their only concern was do you own the master? And if you own the master, they didn't care how it was created, which, I have a lot of problems with that, and a lot of, concerns, but it's just amazing the way that the AI is going to affect music and
Yeah.
how it can mimic styles and stuff. And
And it's just the beginning, of course,
yeah,
of AI. And later, I presume you could push a button and create, like James Michael Stevens, for
yeah,
example,
I
or
think, yeah,
Mozart or Bach or whatever,
yeah.
whoever you want to copy, for example. And that's really concerning, of course, really sometimes worrying trend, right? That
Yeah.
real people, real creators can be
And I've heard that. I've heard
copied
examples of
and
that.
supplanted by machine.
And I've heard examples of turning styles like that into a Mozart or Beethoven and stuff and played for me. And you just wouldn't believe how how it sounds, and how it could be easily fool somebody and everything. So there's a lot coming out on that. I don't know how all that's gonna fall out. Of course, when they copy your style, they have to hear it, so they're getting it from you in a sense. So that you wonder, well, how much of style is matters in like copyright, you know? Is your style so unique that someone has any copyrightable qualities? I don't know. Maybe not, or maybe, but sometimes they've had copyright lawsuits where people have used parts of styles or parts of grooves and gotten in trouble. So it's just a wild west out there as far as these kind of things.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll wait for some regulation, I think, in this
Yes.
field. I think sooner or later, musicians, guilds, and associations, professional associations, will come up with a legal solution for this. It's like in Hollywood, right? They are debating what should be done in terms of AI
Yeah.
production, and you can push a button, and your actor, like
Yes.
entire company could be, you know copied in a matter of minutes probably, and it's very
That's amazing. Yeah.
important for future generations, for future professionals, to come up with sensible solutions to all
Mhm.
parties. Yeah,
Yes.
definitely. So going forward, are there any upcoming projects or albums you're particularly excited about, James?
Well, I try to release on average about a piano album every month. So I just released one called Moments in May, came out a few days ago.
Hmm.
And then I've got another piano one that's coming out in on I think it's June 13th, Friday the 13th, one called Piano Dreams, and it's a set of original, compositions. So other things I'm gonna try to work on some new organ stuff. I really want. I've been doing a couple of those in the last couple of days, and then I want to do a jazz piano combo project. I sort of wrote down on my pad yesterday. And by the way, sometimes when I'm trying to get ideas, what I'm going to do in the future, I just get a notepad and I just write some, what do I want to accomplish? So I'll have some direction. And the other two things I wrote down is I want to do maybe real soon another Christmas collection, and then maybe a sacred hymn,
Hmm.
collection. So I'm gonna start working on some of those in the next little while, especially since I just finished putting up this last piano book, So
Very nice.
yeah,
Very nice. One album per month you usually produce, right?
I think I've been doing the last 3 or 4 years. I've averaged that between the piano and just a handful of organ things. Yeah, I've got. I think on Spotify now I have maybe 83 or 4 albums,
Mm-hmm.
so um, I had when I started doing a few around 2011 or 12 around there, and I did a few albums with TuneCore. I think I did 4 albums, but I quit doing it because I started doing Sheet Music Plus, and it didn't cost anything, and I was seeing a few sales, and because they were charging $49 a year to keep your album up.
Yeah.
So for those 4 albums, I was going to be paying um, uh, $200 a year,
Oh, yeah.
for almost no sales,
Uh-huh.
So then a number of years later, a friend mentioned to me on Song Trader that you could do as many albums as you wanted, and one fee for the whole year.
Uh-huh.
When I saw that, singles and albums, minis, and when I had all these thousands of songs, I thought, well, shoot, if I can pay one fee and just work on it hard and put it out there, not pay any more than that. And then later, a TuneCore came back, and some of these others saw these kind of models from other companies, and they changed their models to now where they're on the same type of thing too.
Mm-hmm.
So about $50 a month on these different programs, you can put out as much stuff as you want. Now, if you're just putting out one album, it may not seem like a good deal, but if you put out, 10 and a bunch of singles, then it's like that's a bargain,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I know. One yearly fee is reasonable, right? If you continue to produce month after
Yeah.
month those albums, probably adds up. Ocean Eye, for example, have chosen DistroKid as our
Yes, a lot of people use that.
distributor to streaming platforms, and it has various levels of membership. But for
Yeah.
us, for two of us, we pay, I think, around $36
Mhm.
per year, and yeah, it's reasonable. Yeah,
Yeah.
reasonable price. So, do you do any promotion, for example, around your Spotify or streaming albums? I know you announce on Facebook about your upcoming albums. Anything beyond that? You do that?
I I don't do a whole lot. I'll do some through some promotional, companies a little bit, and sometimes I'll do some through Spotify itself, and 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 um and there's some review companies that will
Hmm.
review things that sometimes I will do as well, but I try to do it where I'm not spending more than I'm making, where it's just a portion, because it doesn't make sense to like spend a fortune and on to promote something and then only get 1/10 of that back,
Exactly.
so you have to sort of be, careful, of that and everything. But I do some.
Yeah, it's very impressive to see your music, for example, on airplanes like a KLM.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I've been, for example, I haven't flown to with KLM recently,
yeah,
but I've flown with other airlines, and I've been also listening to some meditative piano music or
yeah,
relaxing piano music. I know those artists have some kind of arrangements with those airlines, right? So, do
yeah.
you, for example, with KLM, do you have to go and approach them, or do they approach you?
I have no idea because I never approached them.
Oh,
So, so some things you just sort of wander upon, and it just happens in the process. I found out about that by I think I saw it on my ASCAP statement. So I saw a listing where certain
I
songs
see.
had been played on that channel and everything. So it's like recently on my ASCAP statement I found that had some music that was played on the funeral memorial service at Jimmy Carter's funeral.
Oh,
That was the president
yes.
back in January and stuff. And and um I'll mention this sort of in a sort of chasing a rabbit. One of the reasons to throw out a lot of stuff is that you never know what is going to really catch on. My most popular piece was, as far as monetary wise, that has been just unbelievable. Was really an inconsequential piece on an album that I never thought would have got any attention, but
Hmm.
somehow it generated a lot of income and stuff.
Hmm.
So so sometimes the volume of things increases your odds, of getting lucky, if that makes sense. So,
It does,
because
yes.
if you only have like 10, 20 pieces, your odds of some unusual thing happen, is very, very low. But when you get into, thousands and stuff, it may be just dumb luck. But what they say, every once in a while, a blind nut finds a squirrel, or really a blind squirrel finds a nut. I always say it backwards. But yeah, uh, so you never know on that kind of stuff. You just gotta just keep throwing, things out there, and sometimes some things wind up on placements that you just have no idea about. Now, if I could have put it on that, if I knew how to do that, approach them, I maybe would have done it.
Hmm.
But that particular one, I have no idea.
I see, I see.
Yeah.
Very nice, very interesting. We've talked so much today and covered so many topics, right? And is there anything else you would like to add to this conversation?
Well, I'm not sure. Just that I've just
Or,
enjoyed talking
or,
to you.
or for
Yeah.
example, Is
Uh,
there anything you could tell yourself, let's say going 30, 40, 50 years ago, like an
yeah.
advice to yourself, to your early self? What would it be?
Well, as musician, I would get as much theory and as much practical applied lessons and as much experience as you could. It's so, I think it's so important. Um, lessons on the industry is that it's a small world out there. It's sometimes we think that the world is so big and people are spread. These editors and these program people and publishers are spread by thousands and thousands of miles, and sometimes they are, but many times they all know each other. You know, so you sometimes you just need to realize that you're dealing with a small group sometimes where it seems like you're just a you know one star in the universe, whatever. Um, so in that sense, try not to burn your bridges, try to keep good relations, with everyone, try to take the long view of every situation. And when you're early on stuff, you don't have a lot of leverage, and stuff. Sometimes at the first parts of things, you have to take what you can get. But as you go down the road and as you increase in success and diligence and output, you you learn the ropes and everything. So you can be so worried about making a mistake at the beginning that you don't open yourself to any opportunities,
Such a good advice. So thank you so much, James. Ausra is sitting quietly upstairs
Ah,
in another room,
hey.
waiting not to disturb us. And but she's
Yeah.
sending you her greetings, warmest
Oh, thank
regards.
you.
She loves playing your music as much as I do, of course. And we just hope you will keep creating, keep
Thank you.
inspiring
I'm
all
so
of us, of
honored.
course. And it was so inspiring to cover all those different themes and subjects today. Your dedication is to creating beautiful, meaningful music is truly a gift to musicians and listeners everywhere. I'm sure many of our listeners will feel encouraged to explore your works and maybe even be inspired to create their own. So,
Yeah.
wishing you continued joy and creativity in all your musical endeavors, James. So, thank you so much, and let's keep in touch.
Thank you. It's such a great honor to be with you. I really appreciate it.
Yes, and let's wait for your next piece to play.
Okay, thank you.
So, how was it? I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did interviewing Dr. James Michael Stevens. He is really a very inspirational figure, so prolific, and anyone who is attempting at improvisation or composition in the organ world or even other instruments should pay attention to what he does. And of course, if you want to know more about Dr. James Michael Stevens, please follow the links in the description of this conversation, and you will find out more about his work, about his scores, about all his compositions, and of course streaming platforms, available albums. He has over 80 albums so far, imagine that. So I hope you enjoyed this tremendously, and stay tuned for our next conversations with Ausra on the Secrets of Organ Playing podcast. Thank you so much. And of course, remember, when you practice, miracles happen.